And we're live here with the Zeal Show episode 52, where all the talk is unfiltered, uncensored, and unscripted. And the only line that is scripted is the one that I'm reading right now. So, just a few messages before we uh, go to our guests. So, if you came here from LinkedIn, just want just hope you guys can follow the Zeal Show LinkedIn and also the Authentic LinkedIn. You can see it. If you see this message from LinkedIn, you should be able to see the Zeal Show posting this. So please do follow that page. And if you're coming in from X, please do follow my X as well. We do have these podcasts every single week. And then if you're coming from YouTube, then of course be a subscriber there. And if you're on TikTok, I have a special thing for you. I am going to, uh, there's a lot of people. Hi here. Please do join. And now until the next 1,000 people, I am going to follow every single joiner inside the chat. Okay. So, but just let me know. So in case I miss out, you just write your comment down there, and then I will be able to see it, and I'll be able to follow you as well. Okay, great. So now I just want to say a little bit about this guest. I have got to know him for over, I think, even pre-COVID times, I've heard of his name. Okay, and um, I know of his colleague, Rex, for quite a while, which I then he also will be coming on the show, but in a month's time. Um, but this person is the one was the one driving the whole licensing regime within the company called Independent Reserve to get the first license in Singapore. There's a lot that I do want to learn from him, and he's also now going to run uh, the subcommittee for access. I always forget digital asset subcommittee. He'll talk more about this because as a chair, I really have a lot to see through. But this one, I really support him on doing what he's doing right now. But yeah, let's get him on the show. Just 1 second. Hi, Rajiv. How are you?
Hey Anson, I'm good. How's it going?
Great, great, great. Ah, you see the black magic of the sound is going weird again. 1 second. I can hear echo.
Can you hear me clearly?
Now I can hear you.
All right.
You see this black magic. I don't know what's going on here, but anyway, that's great. So thank you for joining the show. I uh been seeing how you went from independent reserve to the company you're working in that you founded now. Uh, I do want to learn from your journey on how you went from there to becoming entrepreneurial. Because to give you context, usually when you're in the compliance space, you usually would want to stay in unless there's a trigger, okay, or unless there is something that really made you think that I can add value outside. So yeah, but let's start from this beginning. How did you get into compliance and how did you get into crypto?
Right. Yep. I think firstly, thanks for having me on the show, Anson. It's great to be here. It's great to be able to see how I can, provide input and I guess help give you color on some of the things that you'll be asking. In terms of how I got here, it's a bit of a journey. It's been about 15 years or so since I sort of started in the compliance space. Before that, I basically used to work as a lawyer, actually, and then got a little bit tired of it. And then, interestingly enough, found out about a particular job here in Singapore, and within the span of a week, actually got asked to take over that role, or rather to fill that role. But it was baptism. It was sort of like my baptism of fire because I didn't know that that company that I actually just got hired to work for was actually um, in a court battle with the MAS, actually. So
Wow,
this is all
right
public
place, right
knowledge.
time.
Yeah, or wrong place, wrong time, whichever you look at it, right? But they normally say that you can only make the biggest impact when there's a huge mess to clear versus if things are all fine and dandy. So basically my first day of work was me walking to the office, sat down. I still used to dress like a lawyer back then, so like black suit, white shirt, and all of that. And I remember taking off my jacket and putting on my on the chair next to me, and my boss comes down from this from the second floor because we used to be in one of these shop houses in Duxton Road back then. He walked by and said, "Oh no, put your jacket back on. We're going out." He tapped me on the shoulder, and then all of us, the whole team plus myself and him, go out, and then we walk into the Court of Appeal. Mind you, this is my first day of work. Um, he goes behind the stand, and I still remember Kevin Bull from Drew Napier representing the MAS back then. Basically cross-examined my then boss and ripped him to shreds. Now,
Oh, whoa,
being
whoa,
a
hold
former
on. Actually,
litigation,
in a law was a lawsuit. Something was actually going
it
on.
was a
Wow.
full-blown
Okay.
lawsuit. I didn't realize it was at the stage that it was. I mean, I was still new to the space, right? So I just walked in, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, coming into this whole space thinking, oh, things are all going to be great. But it was really interesting because being a like from the litigation space, I used to be a barrister. You can appreciate the skill or the art of litigation, and I still remember watching. It's quite interesting because I technically shouldn't be supporting the opposition, but in this instance, it was quite a it was quite a how do I put it? It was quite a performance, actually. Both by my then boss, I guess, who got into a fair bit of trouble. I think the outcome of the case was he was subject to a civil penalty by the MAS. He was issued a PO for a short period of time, but that was then subsequently shortened. But yeah, I mean, the long and short of it was that there was a fair amount of trouble that the firm got into. And I sort of, when I joined, it was basically at the tail end of this legal battle. So my work was sort of cut out for me because he was a founder of the firm. So he had to sort of leave his position as an executive. And then the firm found three different people over 3 different years to actually come in and take over. And all of them had different ways of doing things. And they all had their own pros and cons about how to go about it. But I think for me, it was basically having to deal with the regulators afresh, not knowing much about the regulatory regime. And this is a fund management company. So it was also about the same time that the MAS sort of split the regime between the exempt fund management regime, where they actually set up a separate RFMC regime, and the capital markets license regime as well. So then there's a whole bunch of new requirements that took place, and base capital calculations and all of that stuff without going into too much technicality. So there's a deep learning curve, or a steep learning curve rather. Um, but that's sort of how I started out.
Oh, okay, interesting. So your background was in legal back then because you worked at June and Napier as a in
No,
the
no,
legal
I
side.
didn't work at Drew Napier. I was basically a lawyer. So I actually got called to the bar in the UK. So I was a
Oh,
barrister from the UK. I did a little bit of work off the record there, and then came back. I'm actually Malaysian, so went back to Malaysia. I got called to the bar there as well, worked there for a bit, and then moved over to Singapore. Um, and it's when I moved over to Singapore that I moved over to the compliance side. And I didn't really feel like I wanted to do the bar here again because it's another Commonwealth jurisdiction. And I felt like litigation would just be another variant of the same thing, effectively. So I decided to kind of just stay in the compliance space and sort of navigate that because there is a quasi legal element to it. And I could appreciate that. But I guess the point I was trying to make was that when I saw Drew and Napier actually argue their case, I could appreciate the complexity and the skill set that was brought to the fore when my then boss was actually being cross-examined. So that was really interesting. But after that, I think it's basically learning in depth about the way the regulators function and the way the expectation of the market works. And that's changed a fair bit. Like, I mean, I actually think the MES or the regulators from say about 15 years ago to who they are today are very significantly different, right? Like they are the regulators, but at the same time, I think that the 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 affinity to do business and the open-mindedness, I think, has changed significantly from back then.
interesting. But okay, so I want to go to the question because okay, to give you context, I've seen a lot of legal people going into compliance and would rather stay there than be in legal. And compliance is a funny thing. Even for me as a entrepreneur, if I understand the risk and policies, even I could go into compliance, right? It's just about understanding the risk and loss, right? But
Hmm.
for you, from the legal side, what made you want to stay and not go back to the legal side?
Mm, actually, it's a very good question, and I think I might actually blame my stint in the UK for that. I think how it works in classic Asian cultures, right? Like your parents want you to be a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer, an architect, or something of that sort, but it's normally driven by um, your folks. That's how to say, like, you know what, we'll pay for your education if you want to do this, but if you don't, then we're not going to pay for it. So, um, what was interesting about being in the UK is that most of my peers who were not Asian, of course, were there of their own whim. Right? Like they were basically built off of this drive to want to practice, to want to litigate, to want to be involved in the vocation, which is actually it's basically the second oldest vocation in the world, right? Um, so they basically wanted to be involved, and you could see the pride that they took in what they did. Um, Unfortunately, when I sort of did a compare and contrast between that and when I went back to Malaysia and I worked there, was it's a bit sad, but I felt like a lot of what I was trying to do was diluted by the general self-interest of a lot of parties that I came across. Now, I know that some of the arguments here would be that, oh, this exists throughout the world, but I think it's a little bit different when you're in a setup that's been run in a certain manner, prioritizing ethics and professionality for a long time, versus if you're in a slightly newer, for lack of a better way of putting it, uh, legal infrastructure
Mm-hmm.
where it's designed to try to protect the individual. And yes, the idea is to have ethics and professionality, but the general convention around it is that let's fill our pockets first and then worry about everything else after. Um, so I won't name names, I won't talk about parties, but again, having that experience very early on got me very jaded, actually.
Mm.
So I think within about a year and a half or even two, I felt like everything that I was doing required me to possibly have to pay someone off or have to have unnecessary conversations where I felt like ethics were being compromised, and I didn't really want to do any of that. I think the worst was when I remember uh, going to court actually, and I had a case that needed to be argued in a short while. I think the case was at 9:50 in the morning, and I went to the court and I went to get my file, and the person behind the counter was sat there sipping his tea. He wouldn't give me my file,
Mm.
and basically kind of told me off and said that if I didn't wait patiently, it was about 9 o'clock by then. Mind you that bearing in mind my case was to start at 9:15, right?
Mm.
So he wouldn't actually give me my file until his tea was finished,
Oh my gosh.
which was quite upsetting. So, I mean, I'm not saying that this still exists today. It's probably a lot better now, but having that experience coupled with a few others, it sort of put me off of practice a fair bit. It doesn't mean that I didn't benefit from the skill sets that practice brought to me, right? However short it was. And in fact, if anything, I think it was actually one of the most useful things for me to bring into the compliance space. But yeah, that's kind of why that took place. And admittedly, when I first started out, I did think it was going to be a bit dull versus the excitement of being in court and in the throes of litigation, arguing against your learned opposition counsel. But yeah, things have changed, I think. And I truly enjoy doing what I do right now. So yeah.
That's great because it's very funny as access chair for this many years when I go in CMAS, when I tell them that I'm going to bring a lawyer with me to see them for some particular meetings, they would tell me, no, I don't want to see a lawyer, Anson, I only want to see you. But now all the
Yeah.
lawyers are infused into compliance, so they still have to see them, but in another vessel, which is the compliance officer. So it's very interesting your how you got to where you are now. So let's now from independent reserve, you were there, and then obviously there's a lot of learnings for you there. How did you come out to do your career regis right now?
So I think this kind of stemmed from my earlier years. I'd actually worked with a couple of guys before and set up a similar type, similar-ish, I guess, compliance firm. But this was a while back, and kind of taught me the initial principles of what running your own business is all about. But I think what was interesting is that while that was a great learning curve, it was also, you learn the do's and don'ts. During my time with Independent Reserve, I realized that, hang on, there is a particular space for higher touch, deeper relationship type services. And what I realized over the time that I've been doing compliance, and I mean, having been on the receiving end uh, as well as the side that actually provides those kind of services, right? Um, I recognize that uh, generally in the market, it seemed to be pay me first and let's deal with the quality of services thereafter. I think the main thing here was that we wanted to see how we could actually potentially change that. Firstly, by just starting on a very simple concept of ensuring that there's a certain level of quality. So, Curia Regis is basically Latin for the Royal Council, or Council to the King.
Oh,
Yeah,
nice.
so the whole premise of that is that the client is the decision maker, the client is the king. The regulated entity can't shed their obligations for regulatory compliance, right? But it doesn't mean that we can't give them all of the information that they need in order for them to be able to make a calculated and informed decision. So that's the whole premise of why that was set up, or how that was set up, and how the name came about. From there, it was based on a very simple concept of delivering value, right? Like if someone's going to be paying you $1, are you going to give them 50 cents worth of your time, or are you going to give them $1.50, right? Now, of course, classic business people will argue that there is an inversely proportional curve where you can't give so much of your time away to the point where it actually renders you to be almost a charity. Now we get that,
Hmm.
but at the same time, we're in the business of selling our time, right, to a certain extent. Um, with that, we realized that we should give the client at least what they should be paying for, if not more. So we go above and beyond, right? Um, Simple concepts like, scope of work may say a certain number of things, but if the client wants us to do more than that and it's reasonable, we can afford to spare the time, we're happy to do it, And I've started to realize that more and more people in the space are recognizing that.
Hmm.
Um, and are starting to work similarly. So what we've realized is that there are other industry partners, law firms, tax advisors, fund administrators, so on and so forth, where when they're built similarly, they actually um, work alongside us in the same vein. So it actually allows us all to grow together, and it's very supportive of the industry because I think at the end of the day, the industry benefits, right? But that's sort of how that started. I mean, during my time with IR, I spent a lot of time um, making sure that IR was, of course, on top of its own regulatory obligations, but also saw this need. So then the idea was very simple to build a team up to get them to sort of focus on the day to day, and it just gained its own traction, actually. So we didn't spend a single dollar on marketing, BD, or anything of the sort. It was just clients referring clients, and we just grew it like
Nice.
that.
Word of mouth is the biggest marketing force ever. That's amazing. So are you
Absolutely.
only just helping the Singapore companies, or you are now starting to see clients internationally that also want help from you as well?
So that's a very interesting question because we are currently only based in Singapore. There is, of course, lots of conversations, and we've been asked to set up shop in other jurisdictions like Hong Kong, Dubai, Australia, and all of that. I'm cognizant of wanting to be very careful with not diluting our interest and capability. So I do want us to, our aim is very simple. We do want to be the best in the market at what we do in Singapore, right? We don't need to have the biggest client base, but we need to be the best at what we do. Right? So that means a certain standard of quality, a certain standard of ability and skill set, and then of course making sure that the team are happy because at the end of the day, a business is only as good as the people that it has internally, right? But then the question is that how do we trickle down that ethos into other entities that want to basically benefit from the way we do what we do? We start with Singapore-based companies. It doesn't mean that if you're not here, you can't be here. So a lot of the conversations I'm having right now, or at least how the conversation started, was companies that were already here. We started doing stuff for them. But then now the conversations are rife where there are a lot of companies that are global setups that are much larger institutions that are, based in the US, UK, in Europe, and so on, that want to have a footprint in Singapore. So then we become one of the first points of reference as to how to get set up, what are the costs of being here, what should be the nuances that they need to think about, difficulty or ease of hiring, the availability of particular profiles that are needed, and so on and so forth. So to answer your question in a slightly roundabout way, the companies that we work with now have to be based in Singapore, but they normally may not be initially. So they may have the conversations with us in order to be based here.
Hmm. Interesting. Interesting. So yeah, so basically what Cure Regis does based in Singapore, but obviously once you reach a certain stage, I can see that your mind would you'll be thinking about expanding overseas as well. But in terms of the client profiles, are you helping like initial startups that just come to you, want to outsource to you, to licensing everything to you, or you need a certain mindset from the founders first before they can do, or they
Mm.
must have some sort of base before working with you. My where I'm going to is that there's a lot of companies that say they want to be in fintech, they're in crypto, they think they have money, they just want to push everything to you. But what I've learned, even
Mm.
from my previous firm, is that the founders themselves also need some sort of mindset to work with the whole team and not just anything legal or regulatory pushing it to you. So, at what sort of level do you take in terms of your clients? Which ones would you take? Which ones you say, you're not ready, don't want to take you?
Interesting conversation, actually. So, um, there's a slightly um, there's different ways to sort of deal with this particular point, and I'll approach it based on timelines. If we had this conversation about 6 to 8 years ago, I would have probably been a little bit more comfortable to say that the barrier to entry is lower, right? And I'm being very very categoric about it. While the barrier to entry was lower, it basically meant that uh, it was generally a bit easier to get a license, right? Now then, Singapore also recognized very early on that hey, we are a great jurisdiction for licenses or for people to hold a license, right? The moment you have that, it's a feather in your cap. We shouldn't just be giving them away that easily. Right? So the regulators tightened up. And I think it was not a bad move for them to do so because it does mean that when you get a license, it justifies the quality and standard of your business in order for you to be able to get such a license. Um, so to that effect, what's happened is that when we now have a conversation, it's interesting to see the mindset of the people behind the business. So generally, they're the founders, or at least the initial business expansion people. If they're large entities, it may not necessarily be the founders that speak to us. It could be the guys that are in charge of expansion into new markets that we connect with. But in some way, shape, or form, we will eventually connect with the founders to understand the ethos of the business. Um, I'll give you a very good example, actually. There's a company that we worked with who wanted to set up shop here in Singapore. And it was pretty obvious during the early days that they were not necessarily familiar with the way the Singapore regime works, right? Um, but what I liked about their evolution was where they were to where they are today is significantly different. I'm talking in specific reference to the founders, right? When they started out, I can comfortably tell you they had no clue what they were doing, and they didn't necessarily engage us to do their license application. But where they came about, how they came about it was that they got us to do a bunch of the documents, and then kept us involved in various parts of the application. But they wanted to do the main sort of um, initiation of the process themselves, right? So we couldn't really say too much at the get go, but they could see that their approach was a little bit, see, let me correct myself, was a significant disconnect from what the regulators expected, and very quickly had to backpedal and then use this to actually shape a lot of the responses and the requirements. But what was interesting about this is that we weren't just saying things to make the regulators happy, right? Like, I know that there is a lot of that that which may go on in the market, right? But I think the proof is in the pudding, in the sense that you can say that you're doing something, but if you can't actually demonstrate that you're able to do it, you're probably setting yourself up for failure,
Yeah.
right? So we had a lot of these conversations with these founders, and then they started to realize, oh, actually, we can't do things this way. We need to do it this way, because they're saying that you have to follow this particular approach, right? And that's what the regulators expect. And that just happened multiple times, over and over and over again, in different aspects or facets of the business. And over time, you sort of realize that, hey, these guys actually now get it. And they started to sort of become a little bit more um, at ease, or ahead of the curve in terms of what the regulators were expecting. So when the regulators came back to say something, they would actually say, "Oh, they're saying this, right? Do you think we should be doing this?" And it was very proactive instead of reactive, and I really like that. And to me, I was sort of like, like when a dad sees his kid ride his bike for the first time
Hmm.
without the training wheels. It was exactly like that. I felt so proud. I'm like, oh, you guys get it, epic, right? And it was exactly that. But to your point, and that's why I'm like sort of taking a bit of time to answer this question. We do have guys that come in through the door that may not necessarily know what is what is it like to run a regulated business in Singapore, right? But it doesn't mean they don't have the capability to get to
Yeah.
that point. Now, then you have the flip side of it, where you have companies that just come in and they're just trying to do something quick and fast and just make the most amount of money and disappear. Um, Honestly, if it smells bad, it feels bad,
It is
you
bad.
probably don't want to touch it with a 10-foot long pole, right? And there's a reputation element to it as well. If you're the kind of company where you're known to bring in these kind of firms and you're trying to shoehorn them into the regime, the regulators eventually pick up on it. The market picks up on it. They then realize, or they associate you with those kind of companies. And they can comfortably tell you that we don't want to be associated with those types of businesses. So I think we're genuinely keen to work with firms that are innovating, that are changing the way the market is operating, that are doing new things. And to me, it's also a form of excitement, right? Whenever I come across a company that's doing something differently, I'm like, oh, how are you doing this? Why are you doing it like this? Why is it operating the way it is? And how are you making money? Like how does it make sense, right? Because I think the ability to understand the product from a very simplistic standpoint only then gives you the real understanding as to how to build controls around it.
Yeah.
If you don't know how big your house is going to be, right, how are you going to build a fence around it?
Exactly. So I'm not trying to pitch what I'm trying to do, but this is really validating the point, even from my experience in my previous firm, that if we get the founders to fully understand what is it that it requires to run a licensed firm, and then basically when the founders have their mindset, it can basically pass on to my to partners, to people like you, helping them with the licensing and everything, like basically getting their mindset right. And then that one will can filter, and every consultant, every firm like yours can actually have a much easier job just to get it through. Yeah,
Absolutely.
it's interesting, interesting. Cool. So yeah, what this is a very interesting conversation, because not only you're trying to build up your firm right now, and also congrats on the Aspire, helping them. That was definitely a very big news. Very big news.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that was fun as well. Like, kind of learning about what they're doing and how they are building up in that space also. But they're just one of many firms that we are working with, and we are actively trying to sort of build on it. Honestly, like we don't normally talk about the licenses that we get. There are
Yeah,
other firms that
you
we've
keep it.
actually
Yeah.
helped.
Mm.
Yeah, but I think what's interesting about it is that when you start seeing products being offered in the space as a direct result of a license being obtained. So Aspire is a great example where they've basically been offering this alternative to classic banking solutions, right? And then now you can basically um, get yield
Yeah.
from deposits. I mean, it's dealing with the classic issues of what the SME market is facing right now, where there's a whole bunch of cash that they may have that they've raised, maybe they're just sat idle right now that they actually can't do anything about, nor do they want to take it and put it in a fixed deposit or something of the sort, or they don't have the capability of portfolio managing their
Yeah.
own funds, right? So I think like these are examples of solutions that I was talking about just now, which the market needs. So it's great to actually be able to be involved in it.
So how do you see things evolving from now on in terms of I am now seeing like a lot of fintech. You can see like Stripe, PayPal offering a lot of stablecoin products, um, and then offering basically products that can do payments, or you can store it and then have some sort of yield. How do you, from what you're doing now, how do you see that evolving? Is that a growing space with what you're seeing?
So you realize a couple of things, right? If you want yield or significant enough yield to make a difference, then most of your funds have to be kept or deposited in USD, right?
Hmm.
Yield is not really being offered too much in SGD at this stage. So I do think that there is this particular issue that the market there is that gap in the market right now, right? And I think that there may be more solutions offering some sort of way to resolve that soon. Um, but I think generally there's two parts to this. Stablecoins are here to stay. Having been involved in seeing how some of these payment flows take place, the market shifted significantly, and we can see the value proposition very quickly when you don't need to wait for USD settlements with correspondent banks. And worst thing is that if you have holidays, a Singapore holiday and then a US holiday, and then you have banking settlement times delayed by 4 days, T+4 can be pretty dire for some of these companies that need to cycle through their US dollars pretty quickly, right? So I think the first point of contention or lack of contention really in this day and age is that stablecoins are going to be resolving a lot of payment issues globally, right? I think what's interesting about it is the integration of stablecoins within a lot of these payment systems.
Hmm.
That's what I've yet to sort of figure out how it's going to become less fragmented. Everyone's got their own way of doing it, but it sort of reminds me of how banking global payments started out, right? You've got like TT, you've got Swift, and then like in Singapore, you've got your Fast and Maps and all of that. In Malaysia, you got another set of payment types. In Thailand, you've got another set of payment types, and some of them are supposed to be able to talk to each other, but they've not really figured it out completely. Um, I feel like that's kind of where the market's going to move towards next. There will be further consolidation to allow for ease of payment. And I'll give you an example. And this is not a plug, but like I actually played around with Cast, which is I think
Hmm.
Rags from Circle set this up, right? I just had just having a fool around with it to see how quick I could actually get from the stage of sending $1 and then transacting in it. And it was so impressive how quick that was, right? And that to me is sort of where the market's moving towards. It's about the ease of which you can transact relatively quickly or use your funds relatively quickly without having to worry about moving funds from one wallet to the
Yeah.
other without having to have multiple KYC points. And I'm saying this also knowing that we shouldn't compromise on compliance, right? We shouldn't compromise on regulatory obligations, the AML CFT obligations, client due diligence requirements, all of that stuff should still stay and won't grow, right? But I do think that there are more efficient ways of doing it instead of having multiple points of which different vendors are being involved to provide the service. You could have a single point of KYC, right? And that could ease the whole process flow where for the customer, they don't see what the engine is comprised of. They don't care. They just know that they're getting from point A to point B, right? And that is effectively where I think the market's moving towards the end customer experience, where they don't see all of these moving pieces. They just know that if they use, for example, their SingPass and they've logged in, the KYC has been done, it's been sent to the 5 different entities that need to get that information. And therefore, once all that's been passed and they're clean and clear, they're effectively able to carry out their transactions accordingly. Of course, I do think that the obligations for the financial institutions grow significantly with that, right? The more painless you make it for the customer, the more painful it is for you on the back end. So then the question is that how are you going to leverage off of AI, technology, people, and then processes and all of that in order to reach that scale efficiently?
Yeah, I really hope one day that I will only need to do one KYC, one set of KYC, and then go into another firm, not using this reliance thing, but somehow it's already done that my KYC is already said my KYC is done, right? Like somehow, like I think which firm was it that said, a traditional firm that said they putting in the ZK tech? Oh, Google. Google said they're starting to use the zero knowledge proof for some of their
Mhm.
identities now. So we're actually moving towards that stage, and definitely pretty amazing. So yeah, so now let's move on to this. So for the viewers, just want to give you context. Raj is not just building his own company. Raj is also putting time to help the trade body access the crypto association in Singapore. So just to give context, I'm the founder of that association, Access. Stepped down for a while, but then came back to help out. And yeah, now trying to bring the momentum to see how the ecosystem can also help out together. And Raj is put his hand up and say, I will help push Adams, the access digital access subcommittee. And there's already a lot of work. His whole day today is going to be full. It was already full, and I asked him to actually do a do a call right now to talk more about it, and then keep it on record. So yeah, so I want to know, why did you decide to do Adams, and with that, how are you seeing that it can evolve?
Um, Good question.
Maybe what is
I
it
do
to you? What
think,
is Adams at the beginning?
okay, so I think, so firstly, I guess I just want to make it clear that I didn't set up Adams, right? It was already there. There were a bunch of guys sort of leading it. It was running reasonably well, I guess, for a period of time. And then it sort of lost momentum and got a little bit quiet. So Adams basically stands for the Access Digital Asset Management Subcommittee. And the idea was, it was to basically be set up to help the digital asset management community to get engaged, and to have a venue to convene and discuss relevant topics, right? Um, I think since then, while the conversation has not really stopped amongst institutions, Adams has lost its luster as being the venue of choice. Now, when the conversation point came up, I put my hand up because I realized a couple of things. One is that I know quite a few people in the space that would love to be involved, to at least start by having place, a regular spot, might even be it could be someone's office, it could be, a place where we all grab drinks, whatever it might be, but basically a point of congregation for the market to be able to sit down and talk about some of these points from a more institutional feel. And that was my takeaway from what I could bring to Adams, right? And that is to basically provided the work on it being the venue for institutionalization in this space. And what do I mean by institutionalization? It's a very nice word to throw around. Um, I think the idea is sort of have a certain set of consistent standards, best practice standards, if I may, right? It may be a means for us to engage regulators if and when that is needed. It basically brings the heft of the larger players that are involved in this space. When I say larger, I'm saying it very carefully as well. It doesn't have to mean that you're big by virtue of the size of your revenue or the number of employees you have, but it could be the influence that you have in the market. It could be your specific input that is very useful. It could be because of your experience or skill set in this space that helps to shape the market. And then we would welcome all contributors in the space. So the idea is to bring together these types of parties to help raise the bar across the market. Because I think that just the crypto space in general has had its own share of issues, right? So there's no harm in actually having to sit together and think about how we can raise the bar, number one, but how to also do it in a consistent manner going forward. Plus, to also get all the different parts of the space to talk to each other because there's so many moving pieces, right? There's tech, there's security, there's compliance, there is the commercial side of things, there's products. Um, and there's so many solutions in the space. There's so many people doing different things. So who really does what and how do they actually fit within the grand scheme of things? Because things are moving so quickly, I think just being able to sit down and have these conversations on a regular basis allows everyone to keep tabs on the market. But also, it's not just from the standpoint of, oh, it's only because I have a business relationship with you will I know what's happening to you, but I may not necessarily have a business relationship with a particular person, but at least I know what's affecting their business or potentially what could affect their target market, for example, right? Like you've got crypto derivatives as a very good example where it's unregulated, but it's a huge part of the market
Oh,
right
yes.
now, and you're getting some of the biggest institutions in the world that are actually dealing with it or running products in that space. So what will be the regulations around that, or where do we look for, or where do we look to? Which jurisdiction do we look to see how to emulate that standards that we talk about, right? So there's all of these conversation points. That's just one example. There are many more that I could just rattle off, right? But we've only got what, like say 15 minutes more. We'll be here till next year if we talk about all that. So I guess the point is to just have that initial point of reference where everyone can meet on a regular basis enough. And we've taken time. Like, I mean, it's been about five, 6 months since I got brought on. But I've also taken the time to bring together the right people because I didn't want to rush the process. I don't want us to just meet for the sake of meeting. I don't want us to have conversations that are basically just PowerPoint slides that don't really do much, right? It's supposed to really build on the trajectory of where the market is and where we can get it to, plus also being aligned with where we believe the regulators would like to see us, the larger players in the space would like to see us, and most importantly, the way the market would like to see us in a transparent, efficient, fair manner, basically.
Yeah, this is a very good point because what's been happening is that the if you want to manage the digital assets, especially here in Singapore, there isn't an easy way to speak to regulators because we have two. So for the viewers in Singapore, there's two main licenses, right? There's the payments license and there's the securities license. The thing is, payments license is supposed to be, especially for the digital assets, for payments. That was the initial aim of it. Yes, there are a lot of exchanges, custody, and so on. But then when you want to manage digital assets, it doesn't fit. Every time you talk to a regulator, especially not the so high level ones, they'll tell you, oh, we already have a Securities and Futures Act. We already, if it doesn't fit in, then it's not there. Therefore, it doesn't fit in. But the thing is, it's missing. Where do we fit this? And then this is where we want to bring, like, hopefully get Adams to see if we can get a conversation to have it fit in rather than trying to go and talk to regulators in a way to make them think that it fits in on either one. So I do hope with you driving this is great because you know how to navigate the regulations, you know how to talk to the regulators. Hope one day we can see that when someone's managing a digital asset firm, they can fit in very easily. Because right now,
Yeah.
maybe this is just from my perspective, but are you seeing that right now that you still have to navigate in order to really manage a crypto fund here in Singapore?
Definitely, definitely. I think right now it's still in its early days. But I do think that we're probably one of the few in the market that know how the regulations work on both sides very clearly. And to that effect, we're seeing this inflection point of crypto and TradFi, right? A whole bunch of people that we're starting to get involved in Adams are existing capital market service entities who do traditional asset management but would love to have a crypto allocation for their clients, right? If let's just say they wanted to do the wealth management model of managing a client's portfolio, maybe on a crypto exchange, how is that done, right? Under what licensing regime does that fall under? Technically, because crypto is not considered a capital markets product, it's exempt, therefore it's unregulated. Um, so it's a slightly
But when it's
interesting
unregulated,
space.
banks see it as high risk. That's the problem too.
Exactly. Exactly. And what's interesting about this is that I remember actually having a conversation with a few banks about 2.5 to 3 years ago. I won't name names, but they were basically mentioning very clearly that they would like to be involved, but they can't see how to be involved. And I basically said, look, I'm happy to even sit down with you guys and talk you through some of these requirements and the way it works. And simple things like on-chain monitoring, the way that works, what are the things to look out for, who are the different vendors that exist, how do these different hits come up, right? What is the difference between 2 hops versus 10 hops? What is a hop in the first place, right? Like all these kind of conversations. I mean, they're a lot more savvy now, thankfully. And whether we like it or not, the banks are all going to be having to get involved in some way, shape, and form because crypto is here to stay, right? But I think what's really important for the market, and this is what Adams is all about, is to figure out how to set these standards, not as a means to self-regulate, but as a means to say that if this is the minimum standard or barrier to entry, right, which is a high bar in itself, then you know that the propensity for um, dodgy market players will basically drop, right? Like they feel less inclined to come through the door, or even if they want to come through the door and try to get involved, it's a lot tougher for them to do so, right? So I think that's the aim here, and by virtue of that, then the industry participants have a certain amount of comfort and confidence in the market in itself, knowing that it's comprised of people that have a genuine interest in its sustainability and resilience, right? And the resilience bit, I think, is one of the most important because I think blockchain is built for resilience, right? But it can be very easily used for or by bad actors. So how do we ensure that the resilience is driven to benefit the market? And that's basically where I see Adams being involved.
Great. So, how do you see 12 months from now? What what do you hope to achieve for Adams? What 12 months from now, when we talk about Adams, what would it be like?
Well, firstly, I think I want Adams to be bigger than me. I don't want it to be Rajiv leading Adams. I want it to be Adams being a fantastic group of people that are capable of, doing things and shaking up whatever needs to be shaken up, really. But most importantly, I think it's about having, by that point in time, a consistent, regular, contributing group of institutions that are comprised of representatives that are members, right? That are basically able to provide the input that the regulators need, right? It could be the financial regulations, it could be the tax regulators, it could be the company regulators, it could be a whole host of things. But I would like that to be the standard that honestly global markets actually look at and say that these are the things that we are noticing. These are the things that these guys are doing out of Singapore. And Singapore is probably the best place in the world right now to be able to pull this off because we are one of the standard setters, right? Um, and if we do it right, I actually think that the rest of the world can benefit from the amount of thought that we put into what we're trying to build out.
But how do you think, from the regulator's perspective, at least especially from MAS's perspective, how will they be able to buy that the standards that we set is good? I may give context. Uh, it wasn't a good start for the payment services side, but I had to do it. I just give you context first. 2017, okay, we had over 10 odd, I think, different exchanges and services that bank accounts got shut down. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
and then as the chair back then, and also some people complaining on LinkedIn, I had to tell MAS. I wrote on LinkedIn and I wrote on some socials that bank accounts being shut down. Bloomberg caught the wave and wrote a whole article on this, and I think that freaked out MES. Okay, that really
Mm-hmm.
freaked out because de-risking, one, is not what they want. Two, Bloomberg was calling them out. And then
Yep.
6 months later, one of the champions, now he's not in part of MES. He's said to be, hey, Anson, let's work something out that we can work with the banks and you guys, because de-risking means that if a particular company loses a bank account, it's not good for the government or the regulators because they can't see anything. It's actually something they don't want, right? And so it was from there that we had the code of practice where we actually wrote out how things work, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it was a trigger of that, but I don't want that to happen again, like put MES on the spot. What is it that you think can, from MES's perspective, I know we're trying to speculate, but from your perspective, how we can convince them what we have very soon is good for Singapore and it can work for you. What do you think?
Um, Maybe I'm a little bit in a slightly biased place to be able to say this, but I think that having, from a personal standpoint first, and I'll start from that perspective, I think I've personally been able to demonstrate to the MES back then that my main aim is for the industry to be able to grow. And that was during the time when IR was trying to get its license,
Mm,
right? Where there was a lot of my personal time actually spent with the regulators, talking through what were the requirements, how to build them out, and so on and so forth. Like there's so much time spent on that, right? Um, Now, from there, the idea was to fast forward and to emulate that same model, but with a bunch of people that are truly trying to do the right things. Now, could we potentially have one bad actor amongst 10 or 15? Possible, right? And as long as we're adopting a certain set of standards internally to determine who are the parties that are joining us, right? And then getting, I guess, a certain set of numbers, right? Um, then the question is that how do all of these people, when they actually say, all these parties, when they actually say what they have to say, are represented adequately to the regulators?
Mm.
So I think the question here is that if the regulators were to talk to us, then the main question to be asked is that why would they listen to us,
Yeah.
right? Um, and to me, it's that because we have institutions, because we are based on institutionalization, we are using institutions to institutionalize, right? It's not just the mom and pop on the street that have their own perspective. And I'm not saying that their perspectives are not to be taken into account, but there is a channel and there's an avenue for raising a point of contention. And Adams is not the channel for the man on the street, right? Adams is basically the channel for the institutions that are trying to basically build at that scale, at that sort of breadth across markets, across jurisdictions, across different regulations, and across different demographics, right? So then the question is, if let's just say the point raised by the regulators could be something that's very locally based. And if some of the institutions that we're dealing with are more focused on other markets, then we probably tell them, look, guys, you shouldn't get involved in this conversation point, right? So to us, it's pretty easy to be able to do that because then by virtue of institutionalization as the standard, right, you can actually take a step back and say, who is suitable to be involved in this conversation and who is not. But I believe that by the end of the year, I think at the end of the 12 months, as you mentioned, our aim is to be able to have that member list. And if there is a particular regulation or a particular requirement that needs to be debated upon, then that member list would comprise of this of suitable profiles that can actually get involved, right? And that can actually give their input, which the regulators would actually benefit from.
Yeah. Great. I think did the sound go off? Can you just test the sound? Can you just say something?
Can you hear me?
Oh, yeah, okay, good. Okay. Great. Okay, we're reaching the end of the hour. I have two more questions for you. For you. One is,
Mm-hmm.
as we talked about the founders, uh, like you said, they talked to you at the beginning. You know that it will go off to regulators. Later, they come back and they somehow have a much more mature mindset on how to talk. It feels like they have grown up. All right, like these things, in terms of this context, what do you think? One thing that founders in crypto really still misunderstand about compliance.
I think they believe that I I do feel I'm going to preface this with a disclaimer first. I do feel that this is reducing as time progresses just because of the space changing and the market participants changing as well. So the mindset's definitely better than where it was before. But I do feel like some founders come in thinking that they can basically do the bare minimum, right, just to get by. And it's interesting to see how that mindset can change relatively quickly if they realize that that bare minimum doesn't actually pass muster, right? Um, Not even licensing. Like, I mean, people on the street are more savvy now, right? If your entity is set up in an offshore jurisdiction, and I'm not saying that just because you're in an offshore jurisdiction, you're going to be a dodgy firm, right? But they look at all the facts together. If you're an offshore jurisdiction, you don't have terms and conditions that are very clear, your products are not very clear, your people that you're delegating or that are responsible for certain things don't really have clear persona. They don't really have like they may not be actual people. They might be AI bots, right? Um, all of that put together, it's pretty easy to see that it's that what you're doing is not legitimate or deemed to be not legitimate. Um, and the market is getting better and better at it. There was a point in time when I think every other scam was crypto related. Now, while there may be still quite a few, but the market's gotten so much more savvier to be able to figure out what are the issues that are being raised, right? Like how are these scammers operating? Where are they operating from? What are the typical jurisdictions that they're operating out of? And their names, right? Like a lot of crypto exchanges now actually have a blacklist internally of any company or any entity that is involved in these kind of things, right? And this also raised with your on-chain monitoring guys and all that. So um, realistically, I think nowadays, if you're trying to build in the crypto space, the legitimacy is one thing, but to do it the right way is really important. Like you can't cut corners, can't expect to just do things as a means to ramp up or scale up really quickly. I think quality is really important. It's one of the things where I think all the big businesses that have done well have focused on across all the large exchanges, stablecoin issuers, DeFi protocols. Like the guys that have really done well have had incredible attention to detail. And I think that's like one of the most fundamental points to actually take home to do well. Alongside, of course, some of the other more nascent things like having a stroke of luck and making sure that your timing is correct in the market and all of that.
Yeah, so I totally agree with you because I'm incubating a crypto startup. Some like I'm not doing it. With some founders from they have also from India. They were doing that, and they wanted to start quickly. They say they have a product. They want to start set up a company. I said no. It's already a very different market. You can't just start it now. You need to know what places you're going to, what regulations you'll be hitting. If your thing is, if your product is defensible when regulators come to you, you need to now think about all that now. You can't just do it straight away. So yet, like you say, you have to. It's not just about the product. Product's only a part of it. The other components are equally important now. Yeah.
Correct.
So great. So then the last question is for you is if someone is wants to contribute to Adams as I'm pretty sure with the narrative that we have now on what we are trying to do with Adams, there's going to be a lot of people that want to contribute and also connect with you, connect with Curia Regis as well. What is the best way to reach out to you?
I can be connected with on LinkedIn. So I'm available on LinkedIn, Rajiv Prem Kumar. You can just search me up. Alternatively, you guys can send me an email, rajiv@thecuriaregis.com. Quickest way to connect. And also I'm at a lot of these events as well. So yeah, if you see me, come by, say hi. Always happy to have a chat. Always happy to be connected. And we can take things forward from there.
Great. Thanks a lot, Rajiv, for joining the show. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having
And
me, Anson.
for next week, we have a guest from based in Switzerland. So the show will be done in the afternoon. Haven't confirmed the time, but should be around 4 to 5 p.m. Singapore time. So what happens for this show is that I'm going to, with my own AI agents, my own AI bot's going to be cutting the different clips because I know the younger generation wants to have 3 minute clips. So there will be 3 minute clips putting onto YouTube, and then if you're interested, can point you to this particular podcast. But yes, for the just so some stats, we actually have quite a number of US viewers as well, not just Singapore. Today, I think in total we have over 100 people that have come in and are watching this podcast. Great. So thanks so much. So for the Asia people in Asia, have a great day ahead, and for people in the US, have a good evening. Thanks a lot, Rajiv again.
Thanks, Anson. Thanks,
Okay.
guys. See
See
y'all. Bye.
see you. Bye.